joining. A little bit about this workshop. It aims to give you all an introduction to the Internet Computer, which is a global compute platform that allows developers to create websites and enterprise-level IT systems and internet services by installing the code directly onto the public internet and with the help of legacy cloud services. If you didn't attend the first session, I have just sent the link in the chat, so make sure you do that. A little bit about DFINITY. It makes it easy, for us to build and deploy blockchain-based distributed applications. Alexa gave a really nice, brief about what DFINITY does and what are all the tools and technologies for you to play around with. Speaking of which, if you use the APIs in any of your projects during the English Fellowship, you could win some awesome swags and hacker prizes. The thing is, like, if you want to get started with it, there are some really awesome resources for you in the fellowship handbook, so make sure you check that out. And today we have Michael, Alexa, Matthias, and Sandra with us from DFINITY. Thanks a lot for joining, everyone. And I now pass it on to Alexa to take the session forward.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Great. So thanks so much for having us again. We had a great time talking with everyone last week. And today we're going to focus on getting you started with some developer tools and resources. So we'll be doing more of an interactive session today, walking you through those tools, and we'll do a live demo at the end as well. So all three of us will be presenting today. I think you met us all on the call last week if you were here, but a quick introduction. We have 3 members from our team and also Sandra Larrabee from our team as well, who won't be presenting today, but is on the call as well. So just a quick recap from last week. If you didn't get a chance to check out the YouTube video that we shared in the chat, please take a look. But last week we covered an overview of the DFINITY Foundation, talked a little bit about what the Internet Computer is, and that experience of building on the Internet Computer and how that compares to the legacy tech stack. We also walked through a few use cases, including scaling decentralized solutions like Ethereum, open internet services, and more. And we also gave kind of a preview of some of the resources that we'll be sharing with you today. And we had a really awesome Q&A session, so I hope we'll have the same today and reserve some time at the end for questions. So for today, I will kick things off and walk everyone through some of our available developer documentation and give you a few tips on places to kind of look in the documentation. We'll also go through our GitHub, and I'll show you a few of the kind of interesting repositories that we have available right now. And then Michael will talk a little bit about some of our community platforms, including the developer forum. And then I'll pass it to Matthias to talk a little bit about content, different videos that we have available, and some interesting blog posts on our Medium presence. And then we'll pass it back to me, and I'll do a quick demo for everyone just to show some of the developer tools in action. And then hopefully at the end of the session, we'll have some time for questions. So with that, I will go ahead and switch over to some of the resources that we want to share with you today. So this is our main kind of documentation site. It's at sdk.dfinity.org. And really for getting started, this is the best place to go. As you can see here, we have this curl link, and if you copy and paste this into your terminal, you'll be able to download the most recent version of the SDK. So really easy to get started. There are a few different entry points here for Motoko. So if you weren't in our session last week, we talked briefly about Motoko. This is a programming language that was developed in-house at the DFINITY Foundation. Actually, one of the co-creators of WebAssembly, Andreas Rosberg, is part of our team here at DFINITY and was very closely tied to the development of the Motoko language. So as you start experimenting with Motoko, you'll start to see how it kind of exposes really unique features of the Internet Computer and also kind of works seamlessly with WebAssembly. We also have resources for Rust, which is really great. So as we talked about last week, any language that compiles to WebAssembly, you can create your software canisters in those languages. So we have a lot of developers who are learning Motoko, but some existing Rust developers are really excited about some of the tools in the canister development kit that we released for the Rust programming language, which we'll check out in a bit. And there's a lot of really awesome resources on here, so we'll dig in a bit more, but the quick start guide is a really great place to start. So there are two different options for you here to get started. There's local development and then network deployment. We'll do a little bit of both in the demo that I'll do later in the session, so you can kind of see what the quick start flow looks and feels like. But we do have this network deployment guide, which is really cool. We have a test net up and running right now. So if you actually walked through these steps, you would be able to deploy a simple app onto our test net and try it out. We also have some really great kind of concepts and high level information on how the internet computer works here. The how-to guides are really, really great. So I think actually a lot of the information in here would be really relevant for this group because it's focused more on how to design apps, how to customize your front end. So every new project that you create within DFX, which is our command line tool, comes complete with a front end. So we'll get to see that in the demo. It's kind of a very bare bones front end that's built in for you using Webpack. And there's some tips within the documentation on how you can customize your front end. So we have developers using their framework of choice, whether that's React or Vue.js. It's really open-ended on kind of what your preference is and how you would like to build your app. These tutorials are amazing. I think they're a really great way to get started. Exploring the default project, I think, is a really great place to start. It will walk you through sort of everything that's included in that new project that you create within DFX. There are some other, as I mentioned, customizing the front end is a really popular one. Inter-canister calls is really great too. It's showing, last week we walked through an example that the DFINITY Foundation created called Linked Up, which was kind of a clone of LinkedIn based on this new canister architecture. And so Linked Up was made up of one canister focused on profile management and kind of all of your educational information and your job. And then the other canister was your social graph. So every time you add new connections in Linked Up, it would build out the social graph for you. And the way that we kind of create that seamless user experience with Linked Up is through inter-canister calls. So as you, as a user, you're experiencing Linked Up in the same way that LinkedIn feels. You don't actually see the inner workings of the social graph and the profile management. And it's the same with this canister architecture, but it's built in this decentralized way where the canisters can interact through inter-canister calls. So actually, if you look in here, I believe that Linked Up, yes, Linked Up is the example here. So you'll get to dig in specifically to Linked Up and those inter-canister calls through this tutorial. Another great point to start is our languages and API reference. So this has a ton of information on Motoko. I mean, it would take us a really long time to go through all of this, but we have a really robust programming language guide for Motoko. And the search functionality is really helpful. We're finding with folks who are beginning with Motoko, because you can search for concepts and paradigms that you're used to in other programming languages and kind of dig right into Motoko. We also recently added this really cool functionality where you can kind of edit the code in real time and run the code. This is kind of building up to a Motoko playground that we'll be releasing in the coming months that will be more of like a browser-based IDE where you can play around with Motoko. But this is a really cool step, and we've been getting some great feedback from our developer community on that. Also, as I mentioned, we have more and more resources building up for the Rust programming language. So not only the repositories that we'll go through on GitHub, but lots and lots of documentation here as well, and some Rust-specific tutorials. And one other kind of interesting thing that I'll note for those that are interested in kind of the blockchain and crypto space, we have recently put out this documentation on how to integrate with the Internet Computer Ledger canister. And so this is really building up to the launch of our mainnet. So we released mainnet at in the beginning of December in its alpha phase, and we're gradually moving towards the beta phase. And at that time, you know, a lot of partners are working on integrating with the ledger so that new applications and functionality and integrations will be ready for that launch. So we're really excited. And I think reading into this tutorial will give you some great insights into sort of how the main network is operating. So yeah, I think that's probably it for the documentation site. So maybe we will switch gears over to GitHub and show you a few of the repositories that we have open here. So the most popular repo that we have open right now is the Motoko base library. So many folks who are just getting started with Motoko are using this kind of on a daily basis. And it's kind of a great resource for getting started with the language. For Rust, this is the Rust canister development kit. So most of the resources, as I mentioned, that we put out during our first SDK release were focused on Motoko. And over time, we've been expanding that to other languages. And Rust is sort of our, I would say, our second most supported language. We also have community members who are building their own CDKs, which is really cool. We have someone who's building an assembly script CDK, which is open. And if you join our developer forum, you can search around for other CDKs that developers are building right now. This is a really, really cool repository. So this started out, we had an internal hackathon last summer where everyone on the DFINITY team built some really cool apps. So we had things come out of that like an open Zoom platform. And we had, let's see, a few of them are on here. A bookworm, so it was focused on kind of decentralized publishing, and all of the source code for these apps is all public here. So some of them are a little outdated because they were using previous versions of DFX, our command line tool, but you know, the code is still super useful to dig into to see how these apps are architected. Also, we had a demo day with external folks in the fall of last year, focused on some of the teams that were building on our Tungsten testnet at that time. And many of those projects are open source as well. So we linked out some interesting repositories here. There's some additional examples from the DFINITY team, kind of side projects. There's one called Journey. And Matthias, maybe you'll cover this in some of our YouTube materials, but we had a series called Hackin' on the Internet Computer, where one of our engineers was on Twitch and was creating this app in real time. We got some really great feedback on that. And all of the videos are on our YouTube, and the repository is open here as well. This is the Vessel Package Manager. So this actually isn't on our official DFINITY GitHub, but this was developed by one of our engineers as well as sort of a very simple package manager for Motoko. And then we have a lot of Motoko resources. So one of our language researchers is really focused on data structures in Motoko. And so something we discussed last week is that with this new paradigm, you actually don't need a database. And so the way that a database kind of manifests itself in your app are through these data structures. And you can kind of build that logic right into your application in order to query the state and kind of manage data in a way that feels familiar and like a database, but you actually don't need the database itself, which is pretty amazing. So yeah, this repository I think is like a gold mine as far as resources goes. And linked up, as I mentioned, so we had the demo last week and all the source code here is here in our GitHub. And another thing that I want to point out is our VS Code extension. So we have, it's also in the marketplace. Let me see if I can get that for us here. The Zoom is covering it up. So yeah, we have that in the VS Code as well, the marketplace. So if you're interested in installing the Motoko extension that is available, you can Google it and find that. And let's see here. I think the last thing I wanted to show is Candid. Oh, actually, there's two things. Examples here. These are a bit more simple examples. So the awesome DFINITY repo has more sample apps, and this is more focused on very simple examples. And we have those in Motoko and C. And these are sort of like the beginner programming language, like phone book, hello world examples that you can go through. So these loosely map to the tutorials that we were looking at on the documentation site, if you're looking for kind of easier examples to get started. And the last thing is Candid. So this is a really interesting piece of work that the team has been tackling. It's an interface description language, and it actually allows you to communicate with canisters in different languages. And there's also a UI component to Candid where you can inspect the methods of your canister, which is really cool. And we'll look at that during the demo in a bit. But I know this is a lot of information. We have tons of documentation and code available, and we're going to be releasing even more over the next month or two. So if you're following these resources, you'll likely see them evolve and grow quite a bit coming up soon. So, but there's so much here to get started, and we hope you'll check it out. So Matthias, with that, I may stop sharing and pass it over to you.
Sounds great. Thanks, Alexa. Yeah, hopefully that was a good overview for everyone in the audience. There's clearly a ton of material, so we're going to just continue by bombarding you with even more. So I'm going to take you through different types of content that we've created kind of across the board, but we'll start with our video content and then transition over to our Medium. And I'll send a couple links here through the chat as we go. Just give me a moment as I pull up the right screen. All right, wonderful. So this one is our YouTube DFINITY channel, easy to find. I won't link this one over. I'll link over some of the more specific items, but this is a great repository for tons of different types of content that we have from everything from, kind of as Alexa alluded, the hacking on the internet computer, all the way up through some of our more, our speaking events at things like Web Summit or our milestone events. So when you kind of get through a way to quickly navigate some of the milestones that you see here, Sodium Network launch. This was our most recent major event. We launched a few different components, such as interview of the tokenomics or overview of the tokenomics that are part of the internet computer, but also a lot of words from community members that have been building. So a great way to kind of jump in and understand some of the different aspects that have become available due to the internet computer. Then before that was our Tungsten launch, where we actually unveiled a lot of our technical milestones that really allow us to showcase some of the new features of the internet computer and some of the first live sample dApps. If you want to just jump into the milestones themselves, you can go in and see our presentations from Davos. We actually give some of the first overview of some decentralization through the internet computer, and then the keynotes themselves, right? To get a better understanding of maybe what is the internet computer itself in some more high level. And then here's that series that Alexa was referring to, the Hacking on the Internet Computer, where you can jump in and see kind of this live Twitch building of an application. As we kind of go through, there's a ton of great content in there. One of the things that I think is great resource for people is our Medium. So let me just link this one quick. I guess the chat's gone. I'll link it in a moment. But there's a ton of different types of content, but I think a lot of this content is extremely focused for our developer audience. So there's some key kind of articles that I think I want to direct your attention to. So the big one is these videos teach the basics of the building on the internet computer. So this gives you kind of a fundamental, 1 through 9, 10 steps of, what is the internet computer? How we simplify the developer experience? What is the SDK? Really good stuff to really get your feet wet, especially if you maybe didn't see the first session. This is a great way of kind of understanding some of the ins and outs from a high level, going in through some of the things that we've developed. Beyond that, to get a better understanding of what is the internet computer itself, there's a great article called A Technical Overview of the Internet Computer. I'll link all these in the chat after, but this gives you some more of the nuances of the inner workings of the internet computer itself. Like, what is the network nervous system? How do canisters work, and how do they scale with subnets? Some of these more in-depth questions. And then I think this is one of a great article that we released recently. What are the things that we're doing for developer experience on the internet computer itself? So this, again, will link you out to a lot of the tools that you've already have a better resource from that I know that we've shared with your team that you have on your file. But again, a lot of the things that Alexa has kind of referred to and that we'll refer to and showcase are linked out here, and it gives you a great understanding of what is everything that goes behind allowing people to actually develop on the internet computer. And then one of the more kind of fun applications that we've had showcased for a while is this Reversey. It's a multiplayer game on the internet computer. It's built some time ago in partnership with Paul Liu and some team members from MIT. Really fun, kind of interesting game, and also gives you some nuances of how the internet computer has been leveraged to do so. And then one of our more recent articles, just to kind of showcase that we're constantly updating and releasing more and more tools for the developer community. Candid, it's a common language for application interfaces on the IC. And we just up-leveled the UI for that to make that much more user-friendly, taking in the feedback that we're hearing from you. So also to note, we'd love to get your feedback throughout this entire process. If there's anything you're finding with documentation, anything you're finding as you're developing, any questions you have, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, to the MLH team. We really want to ensure that we're taking your feedback in and improving, quality experience across the board. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Hunt here to kind of go through some of our community materials.
Thank you both for that. I know we have, again, been throwing just quite a lot of information at you all. So, I think this would be a really great opportunity for us to kind of just slow things down and remind everyone who is thinking about building something on the internet computer that you are absolutely not alone, that there are other people who are really trying to dig into this right now too. And they want to be at the bleeding edge of some of this new technology that's coming out and enabling us to build some different types of products and systems. So I wanted to just chat a little bit about, where do you find those support groups? Where do you find a little bit more assistance, a little bit more hand-holding? So hold on, let me go ahead and share my screen and pull up a couple of resources. All right, share. There we go. So the first thing, actually, I'm going to come back to our SDK channel. And the very first thing that I wanted to point out to, just in case it was, you kind of overlooked this, was just this little support widget that's down here in the corner. We are adding to this pretty much every day at this point to really just make this a bit more robust. And as you have some questions, a really good place to start might either be in the search function up here or by asking this support widget. Now, also noting with the support widget is this is another great way for you to reach out directly to the DFINITY team. We are certain that, with any type of new technology that there will be bugs, there will be all sorts of things that, we could use your help in identifying too. And sharing that information with us is really only going to allow us to improve the developer experience a little bit faster. There's also, I believe my face is blocking it, but let's see if I can show it. So there's also a little widget up here at the top, or icon at the top for emailing us. But the next thing I really wanted to point out is what is next to that, and that is this icon for form. And that just brings you over to the DFINITY developer form. Also really easy to remember and get to. The URL for that is just form.dfinity.org. And it may seem like there's a lot going on in here, and that's because there is. And I think it's a really great place for people to kind of come in, take a look at some of the questions that are being asked. You can also, there's a search function. So if you have some specific questions relating to, certain components, or maybe you just want to share ideas that you have and things that you're working on, here's a really great place to do it. And a good number of DFINITY engineers and staff also spend some time on the DFINITY developer forum. So this is a really great way to kind of get your question right in front of them. Maybe there's an idea that you have, some feedback you'd like to give. All of those things are possible here on the forum. So again, if you pop over to this categories section, you can kind of get a little bit more of a lay of the land for all of the different categories and channels that there are. But it's pretty simple to go ahead and just create a new topic. And then I always kind of just like to pop in and take a look at the latest, the latest threads. That's just going to give you a good sense of what's top of mind for a lot of the people out in the community right now. And in addition to the developer forum, you will find community channels on things like Reddit and Telegram. And I know there's also conversations about us, putting together something perhaps for maybe Discord down in the line in the future. But we also have a community channel specifically for MLH students. So I believe those resources and that information should be available to you, but if not, we'll make sure that we get that in front of you. So as you guys are going through the course of the program, Should you have questions specifically related to some of the projects that you're working on, or how to just get started with defending the internet computer, feel free to utilize that Slack instance as a resource as well. People like myself, Alexa, and Matthias will definitely be there monitoring that and try and get you guys help as soon as possible. So let's see. Other than the developer forum, I really wanted to kind of point out a few last things. So the next thing is the DFINITY Education GitHub organization. And I really do love this organization. I know it may be difficult sometimes when you are digging into something that's a bit new and novel, like the internet computer, and you may have questions around how does this differ from your normal way of building and kind of some of the conventional wisdom out in the industry currently about how we build these type of products and applications. So the DFINITY Education organization is specifically meant to develop very small, short courses that teach people how to utilize the internet computer through the lens of topics they're already familiar with. So let's take a quick look at this protocol design course. Each course is broken up into about 4 modules. And again, the modules consist of some written content, more for reading exercises, and some coding activities to help people really kind of drive the point home. But for this protocol design course, we really wanted to help people understand that not only is the Internet Computer Protocol itself, a protocol that combines independent data centers together to provide this global compute resource, but you can also build protocols on top of the Internet Computer Protocol, which is kind of interesting to wrap your mind around. So in this particular course, we walk students or users through the opportunity to build something like DNS on top of the Internet Computer Protocol, as well as take a look at a banking protocol. Let's take a peek at one of these other courses. So data structures, for example, I know it's been mentioned before that data structures is a very interesting topic here with the internet computer because we don't necessarily utilize databases in the same way that many might be familiar with. So maybe getting started with a course like this might be a really great way for you to learn a little bit more about how data structures differ on something like the internet computer, diving a little bit more into this documentation, and then getting a bit more hands-on experience in practicing how data structures differ on the internet computer ahead of building your projects. That said, if you take a dive into the documentation on the SDK page, and you find that you are ready to go and you don't need some of this additional support, we really encourage you to do so. And I think the very last thing that I wanted to touch upon before perhaps we could either open it up for questions or shift over to the demo I know we've been throwing a lot at you, is just to point out one last channel, and it's the DFINITY Foundation Twitter account. And I definitely recommend giving this a follow. But in addition to the main Twitter account, I always recommend that people follow DFINITY developers on Twitter as well. And this is just going to be the account that really kind of tweets a little bit more about all the different changes to core protocol, changes to developer tooling, talks about new resources and things that we have for the developer community. So to the extent that you really want to stay up to date with all of the new things that are being released pretty frequently at this stage for the developer community, I definitely recommend following DFINITY developers if you are a Twitter user. But that said, we welcome you all to joining all of our community channels and spending some time with us. And, as you are getting up to speed, please, don't hesitate to ask questions. It's the quickest way to learn. And I know it's a lot to dig into. So we appreciate you taking the time to do so. All right, I think with that, perhaps Alexa, what would you prefer? Maybe we stop for questions. I know we have some time. Or would you like to move to the demo?
Yeah, why don't we go ahead and break for a few questions now just on sort of the resource download that we just gave, and then we can kind of switch gears over to the demo. So any questions on anything that you saw? I know we sent a lot over to you. The one thing I'll say is that the developer forum has become super active. And so we've received the feedback from early stage developers that are just getting started with the internet computer that that's a great place to start, because there's a lot of legacy threads now that have built up over time. And so it's sort of becoming like a knowledge base where you can search for different topics or concepts that you might be familiar with in other programming languages. in particular, there's a ton of help there on Motoko. And many of our team members are very active on there. So we have about 10 team members, I would say, that are like actively monitoring the forum, answering questions, and helping out with code and things like that. So would definitely recommend joining.
Absolutely. And one thing to add to that is it's just been really great to see some of the developers who got started with the Internet Computer very early and have been doing the hard work of asking these questions and progressing the developer experience, now stepping in to also help new developers who are joining the ecosystem. So between the DFINITY team members and some of the seasoned, I would say, to the extent you can be so, Internet Computer devs, there is a lot of help on the developer front.
Any other questions? Ideas, things that you would like to see that we didn't show? So maybe you have a particular resource as a developer that you really love for other communities. We're definitely open to suggestions on that too. Or we may have something hidden somewhere that we forgot to unearth for you, which is entirely possible. Okay, well, while everybody's thinking about that, maybe we switch gears over to the demo. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen again. So I thought it would be kind of a good idea to go through just a really basic kind of hello world deployment. And what I can show you is sort of the whole process from downloading the SDK through to creating a new default project. And then what we'll do is I'll kind of toggle between local development and then deploying to the network, so you can kind of see some different workflows that you might be engaging with as a developer. So I already have the SDK downloaded, but we'll just go through the process so you can kind of see how that works. So as I mentioned, if you go to sdk.definity.org, copy the curl link there and pop over to your terminal, you will be asked to agree with a license agreement. So if you want to read that in great detail, there's a link right here, and go through the process. So right now we have version 0621. So we actually, since we released the SDK in November of 2019, we've been updating the SDK basically on a bi-weekly basis since then. So it's been really exciting for our developer community to follow along and track these updates with us. So, so let's go ahead and see if we're installed. Yes, so we have the latest version of DFX, our command line tool, installed. So the first thing we're gonna do is I'm gonna navigate to my folder where I have all of my Internet Computer projects, and we'll just go ahead and start a brand new project from scratch. So we'll just do DFX new, hello. And what this is doing is basically creating this template project that I mentioned to you. So in our documentation, you can go through and read in more detail about kind of all the components that are included in this default project. But at a very high level, there is, as I mentioned, a built-in front end, which we'll access, as well as the kind of hello project. So that is kind of the first default project that you'll get, is this hello that we'll go through today. So the next thing we'll do is navigate to our hello project. And we recently released a workflow improvement for our developers where you can just do DFX deploy, and it actually wraps up several commands. So in the past, you would do, you would create your canisters and then build and compile your canisters and then deploy them. And now you kind of can do that all in one step. So for local deployment, the very first thing we'll do is start up a local replica. And what that means is you're actually getting a full instance of the Internet Computer locally on your device. So it has kind of consensus and all of the interesting layers of the Internet Computer stack in a local replica. And so if you're familiar with other kind of decentralized paradigms, this is sort of like starting up a node on your laptop to experiment with. So we will go ahead and start. I usually do starting it in the background because otherwise you will have to open up a new terminal. So we started up the replica, and then as I mentioned, we have this really awesome workflow improvement called DFX deploy. And as you can see here, it's doing a few things. It's creating our canisters and it's assigning a canister ID to each of those canisters. So in this default project, there's the hello canister, which holds the code for the hello application, and then the hello assets canister, which is all of the built-in front-end functionality that I mentioned. And so what this is basically doing is creating canisters, assigning them unique canister IDs, and then compiling that code. And so the next thing we'll do, I will actually, let's see if I can bring this up for you guys to take a look. So in this kind of default hello project, what you'll see here is, so these are the two canisters that I was referring to. So there's the hello canister and we have a couple little errors going on here. This is actually the Motoko language extension, which is pretty cool. So you can see that this is kind of in action right now. So this is just obviously a very simple kind of hello app, but it's using the Motoko VS Code extension. And so this is the canister containing the app code. And then we have kind of all the assets, built-in asset codes, code right here. And as I mentioned, all of the front end kind of comes complete with Webpack. And then the only other thing I wanted to show you is the DFX JSON file has some interesting information for you to dig into. So this is basically like the config file within the built-in project. And what you'll see here is for local deployment, it's providing you with this port that we're going to access with our canister ID so that we can check out the front end. And so if we come back over to the terminal, you'll see that we have these two canister IDs. And in order to access the front end, you're going to take the canister ID of the assets canister. So we'll go ahead and copy this and head over to the browser here. So if we check out the port that I mentioned, so this is kind of the built-in port that is included in the DFX JSON file that I mentioned. And you'll basically use this, this structure in order to access the front end of your canister. So the port and canister ID equals, and then we should get our hello front end. So this is kind of the very, very basic kind of front end that's built into the project. But if we put in my name, we should get a response back. Hello, Alexa. Yeah. So this is a really, really easy kind of project that's built in for you to get started and download and experiment with today. A couple other things I wanted to show you. So we mentioned Candid, which is this interface definition language. And we have a built-in UI for that. So this is kind of a really cool trick. So if you add Candid here before the question mark, you'll actually get this UI. And so depending on what your canister is, you'll be able to go through and inspect and kind of play around with your methods directly in the browser, which is really cool. And as Matthias mentioned, we went through kind of a huge overhaul of this recently and improved the UI pretty drastically. So that there's some really cool new features like an output log. And then you can kind of search your methods. If you have a more complicated canister, you might use this kind of method table of contents more frequently. So that is really cool. The very last thing I wanted to show is switching over and deploying this to the Sodium network. So it's a pretty simple switch from that. What we'll do instead is we'll do DFX deploy again with the network flag equals IC. And then this will kind of go through the entire process again of creating canister IDs, except this time on the network. And we'll be able to access it through a bootstrap that we have available. And actually this link I'll be able to share in the chat and everyone will be able to access this app because it's actually deployed to the network, which is super cool. But very similar, we get a canister ID for both the hello canister and the hello assets canister. And let's see, give it a moment here. Takes a little bit longer on the network versus the local deployment. But once that is installed, we will take this asset canister ID again. So this, again, anytime you want to take the, to access the front end, you'll take the asset canister. And this time what we're going to do is take our canister ID and then access the bootstrap at ic0.app. And we should be able to, yes, so it's the same app just deployed to the network at this point. And hello, Alexa. So what I'll do is I'll actually take this, this link, which is super cool, and I'll share it with you guys so that you can also give it a try. Let's see. So I just chatted that in our Zoom chat. So if you go there, you should be able to actually access the app on the network as well. And one other thing I'll share, just in case you were not on our session last week, is we also have a demo app called Linkta that's deployed to the network. And so I'll send that through in the chat as well, so you can get another example of sort of a sample app running on the network. But yeah, that was it for kind of the really basic demo, how to get started. I think it's really cool that, you know, we have some of this built-in functionality that you can experiment with local development and deploying to the network with just like a simple hello.
Thanks a lot for sharing, Alexa. I see there are a few questions and a few discussions that were happening in the chat. So the very first one was, is prior knowledge of blockchain necessary? So if you could elaborate on that.
That is a really great question. And I'm happy to report that no, you do not need prior blockchain experience. I think something that has really resonated with folks when we talk about the internet computer is, you know, in the past, people have asked, like, is this a good blockchain use case? Like, when does it make sense to use blockchain? And I think the internet computer kind of uniquely abstracts blockchain away from the developer so that really anything can be a blockchain use case. So based on sort of this new paradigm, you can build something as simple as a website, whereas maybe before with other blockchains, it would never make sense for you to build something as simple as a website in this decentralized way. And so I've really liked to describe the internet computer as sort of the blockchain use case itself. And we've solved for that. We're basically saying, hey, blockchain is a great use case for creating this decentralized compute platform. And now the developer doesn't have to make that decision on should I use blockchain or not. You're basically provided with all the benefits of blockchain through this platform without having to have that previous knowledge. So that being said, you know, canisters are, we like to describe them as an evolution of smart contracts. But I think smart contracts can kind of sound intimidating, but what they really mean is just programming on the blockchain. So we talked a bit about this in our session last week, but Ethereum was sort of the first blockchain to really introduce this concept of creating apps and code on the blockchain. And so what we've essentially done through canisters is evolve the way that smart contracts work. And actually the experience looks much more like the typical developer experience today, where you're able to use web frameworks that you're familiar with, languages like Rust that you're familiar with, so you don't have to learn Motoko, you know, per se. And yeah, so I think absolutely we hope, and that's one of our goals, is to kind of abstract away that complexity, but provide you with all the benefits of blockchain.
Thanks for sharing, Alexa. There's one more question by Manzi. So they're struggling to understand how internet computer might be, for example, different than AWS. So is that internet computer data centers are independent from any other individual company? They're saying, let's say I use Netlify to deploy my apps. What are some compelling reasons to switch to internet computer hosting?
That's a really great question. So basically with kind of centralized cloud providers today, like AWS and Google Cloud, all of those data centers are owned by AWS and Google. And so there's sort of, you know, actually I came from the enterprise space before joining DFINITY. And there's actually kind of a fear of the cloud on the part of enterprises, because they're like, I don't want to put, you know, all of my sensitive data on this cloud and then perhaps have Google or Amazon be able to access that information in some way. And so I think there's, and from a consumer perspective, I think people are becoming wary of hosting all of their data and information on something that's owned and operated by big tech. And so the way that the internet computer differs is twofold. One is that all of the data centers running the protocol are independent. So you might have read that in our documentation, but that means that these data centers are not owned by any single entity. There are mechanisms within the network nervous system to make sure that that ownership is distributed and also geographically distributed. So the data centers right now are all over the world, and we're going to continue onboarding more data centers to kind of increase that geographical diversity. And then the other thing is the decentralized nature of this. So not only are these independent data centers part of the network, but they're running the internet computer protocol, which enables this to be a truly decentralized network. And the way that manifests itself is with something called subnets, which we discussed a little bit last week. So these subnets are basically created across these different data centers. So let's say you're deploying a canister to the internet computer, it will be hosted on a specific subnet, and that subnet might be made up of nodes from different data centers all over the world. So it is truly decentralized versus today, with something like AWS and Google Cloud.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, actually, I was just exploring the definition, and actually, I got like few concepts for the Sprint Zero ideas that I want to build something like deploy with DFINITY that you generally see on GitHub READMEs. There's a button kind of thing, deploy to Vercel or deploy to Netlify. Similarly, I want to build something, a developer tool, which is actually stating deploy to DFINITY. I'm not able to figure out how do I achieve it. I'm not able to thinking out like, oh, how should I get started with it? Can you help me with that?
That's a really good question. And we actually have a team that is working on something similar right now. So I know you mentioned Netlify. There's another startup in the space that's been focused on Web3 and, I'm sorry, decentralized kind of versions of Netlify. And so I think there's some really early experimentation right now with GitHub Actions and being able to kind of push code to the internet computer. So we'd be happy to send along some information on kind of what that partner is working on, and maybe even loop you in with them to get some tips and ideas.
Thank you.
Sure.
Or yeah, actually, one more thing that is the canister that the idea behind it, the actor is like every time of an actor we make actor class, is it a canister only that each actor is a canister?
Yes, that's a really great point, and that is correct. So we have actually a blog post, Matthias, I don't know if you brought it up or not, but it's called like the evolution of smart contracts and explaining what canisters are. And I think it does a really good job of explaining what canisters are. And one of the things is canisters as actors. So you're right on with that. Right on with that.
Thank you.
Hello. So I sort of have, I think it's a bit silly question, but I want to know, does the internet computer support languages other than Motoko and Rust? Because when you started the Hello template, I saw a package.json and node dependencies were there. So I was sort of curious about it.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So any sort of like canister development kit that would be created, by us or by a community member right now would be languages that compile to WebAssembly. So there's kind of a short list of languages like C and assembly script that people are starting to experiment with how to create canisters in those languages. But we also have what are called agents. So maybe you saw, and it's actually not on our GitHub right now, but let me go ahead and send this across if I can find it. We have this resource on NPM right now, and we will be open sourcing it on our DFINITY GitHub very soon, which is a JavaScript agent. And so these agents basically help you define the interfaces to building kind of in other languages as well. So I think a combination of like existing CDKs, these agents, and then the candid language, which we talked about a little bit earlier, those should help you kind of navigate different ways to experiment with other languages. even if you're not building those canisters directly in that language.
So I guess that does it. Thank you.
I think
Hi Alexa.
oh yes, sorry,
Like
go ahead.
yeah. So I had an basic experience in building the smart contracts in Ethereum. So I faced like we'd be spending some Ethereum coins while doing each and every transaction. So in the similar way, like Definity requires some. Is it a free service or is it a paid service? Like we need to spend some sort of cryptocurrency, something like that, to
Yeah,
achieve this.
that's a great question. So we have what is kind of referred to as a reverse gas model. And what that means is that the burden of kind of fees doesn't fall on the user. So if, with your experience with Ethereum, you probably know in order to even interact with a dApp, you need to have that token in order to kind of even use the app. And by reverse gas model, what we mean is that the developer actually funds the canisters so that from a user perspective, you can access a link like what I sent through in the Zoom chat, and you don't have to have tokens as a user to interact with the app. And so it looks a little bit more like a traditional cloud service where you're paying for credits or things like that to keep your app hosted on the internet computer. And the way that that works is, so ICP tokens, which is the native token of the internet computer, are burned and they create what are called cycles. So if you think about gas on Ethereum, the analogous term for the internet computer are cycles. And so what you would do is use the ICP tokens in order to fuel your different canisters that you have running on the network with cycles. And so as you make more, as those operations occur in your canisters, the cycle balance will go down and you can kind of manage those cycle balances.
Okay, that means the developer will be paying for that and the user will not be spending their coins.
Exactly, yep.
But that's cool.
And just on a cost comparison, we don't have a lot of documentation out there soon, but we're working on that right now to show developers sort of which operations cost, a certain amount of cycles and things like that so that you can have those considerations when building your app. But we can say definitively that it will be way less expensive than Ethereum right now, and maybe, a bit more than existing cloud solutions, but you're sort of getting those benefits of a decentralized solution. So we'll definitely have more information on that soon so that you can start thinking about what it would actually cost to run your app on the network. But today, the Sodium network, which we talked about, is all free. So we basically fund cycles for you. So you don't have to worry about that today. So if you go to our documentation site and to that network deployment quick start guide that I mentioned, you can get started on the Sodium network, and there's no kind of concept of ICP at that point. It's just all kind of free to use.
Thanks, Alexa.
Sure.
Do we have any more questions?
I think the last thing we wanted to plug, Matthias, I don't know if you were going to chime in too, but we are kicking off some weekly office hours for you all and for a few other partners. So those will actually start tomorrow. I know that it's kind of a quick turnaround for you all who are just getting started, but we will make sure to send through the Zoom information for that so that you have it. But we'll have, a few of us there along with some engineers to answer technical questions, or maybe you get really busy on the doc site tonight and have some code to share tomorrow, which would be amazing. But just know that we are planning to have those going forward on a weekly basis for you all to come back and ask us questions.
Perfect. I don't see any more questions. Thanks a lot for joining, Alexa, Matthias, Michael, Sandra. It was really amazing having you again. And
thank you for having us.
For those who want to go take a look at this presentation again, we'll be uploading it on YouTube soon and sharing the link in the Discord channel. Closing remarks from the DFINITY team?
honestly, we're just really excited to be working on this project with MLH and a couple of other projects with MLH. So to the extent that we can be helpful for the students, as they get started and start building, we're here to help.
Great. Thank you all
Okay.
for having us.